Your Majesties, Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, 20 years ago, Nelson Mandela stood on this podium receiving the Nobel Peace Prize together with Frederick de Klerk. His victory over apartheid, his refusal to give in for bitterness, and the desire for revenge represent one of the biggest victories of mankind. In his Nobel lecture, Mandela said the following: "Let it never be said by future generations that indifference, cynicism, or selfishness made us fail to live up to the ideals of humanism which the Nobel Peace Prize encapsulates." Mandela certainly lived up to the highest standards of the prize. We greet the many who today mourn Mandela's passing in Soccer City and around the world. Your Majesties, representatives of the laureate, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the entry into force of the Chemical Weapons Convention in 1997, prohibiting the development, production, storage, and use of chemical weapons, states that the parties to the convention, and I quote, "are determined for the sake of all mankind to exclude completely the possibility of the use of chemical weapons." Isn't that beautiful? Still more beautiful, it can be achieved. We are, in fact, close to the target. And this is to a large degree due to the work of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, OPCW, which was created to ensure the implementation of the convention. The Nobel Peace Prize for 2013 therefore goes most deservedly to an organization and its personnel who have been quietly working to remove an entire category of weapons. Over congratulations. And with this year's prize, we prompt those states that have not acceded to the convention to do so. The use of chemical weapons in warfare is nearly as old as mankind. For thousands of years, spears and arrows have had poison applied to them to enhance their effect. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey tell us that such poisoned arrows were used by the parties to the Trojan War. Chinese Sun Tzu mentioned the use of fire with various weapons. In Hinduism, the law of Manu favors a ban on poison and fire arrows, recommending the poisoning of food and water instead. Up through the centuries, there are masses of examples of the use of various chemical weapons. In due course, there followed demands for bans on such weapons. The Hague Convention from the Peace Congress in 1899 and the Convention from the Congress of 1907 recommended the prohibition of poison and poison weapons in the waging of war. But it was of little use. World War I marked the first massive use of chemical weapons in war. By the end of war, a total of 124,000 tons of gas had been produced. 85,000 are reckoned to have lost their lives owing to the chemical weapons, while almost 1.2 million were injured. In the wake of World War I, international efforts to ban the use of chemical weapons and prevent such suffering from being inflicted again on soldiers and civilians intensified. The result of this renewed global commitment was the 1925 Geneva Protocol for the prohibition of the use of associating poisonous or other gases and bacteriological methods of warfare. But again, it didn't have much effect, because it did not forbid the production and storage of such weapons. As long as possession of such weapons was permitted, there was a strong temptation to use them. Hitler used chemical means to take the lives of millions of people during the World War II, but surprised many by not making direct use of chemical weapons when waging the war itself. In Berlin, they were probably afraid of what the Allied response might be if the Germans were the first to use such weapons. Their own forces might also suffer from their use on the battlefield. Since World War II, chemical weapons have been used frequently. The former regime in Iraq made extensive use of chemical weapons, both in the war in Iran in the 1980s and on his own Kurdish people. Terrorists have also used such weapons. The Geneva Protocol in 1925 had, in other words, not had the required effect. A more comprehensive agreement was clearly needed. The new Chemical Weapons Convention was drawn up in 1992-93. It prohibits use, production, and storage of such weapons, and the convention entered into force in 1997. The OPCW was established to see that the convention was implemented. The OPCW's objective then is not arms control, as so often otherwise in such connections. The objective is disarmament in the form of elimination of chemical weapons. In effect, a huge step in human history, because never before has a weapon previously integrated in the armed forces and doctrines of states been banned and its removal sought from the Earth's surface. The convention, which entered into force in 1997, has rendered chemical weapons taboo under international law. The convention imposes many detailed obligations. All countries that ratify the agreement undertake to submit a full survey of whatever they possess of chemical weapons and equipment of such weapons. They furthermore undertake to destroy whatever they possess of such weapons and production facilities, and to admit international inspection to ensure that such destruction has taken place. The destruction must be carried out in cooperation with OPCW. The OPCW has the right to inspect any production facility in a signatory state at 76 hours' notice. Now, 190 countries are currently members of the OPCW. The members represent 98% of the world population and territory, as well as 98% of the world's total chemical industry. 80% of the chemical weapons have been removed. 90% of the production capacity has been destroyed. We are accordingly quite close to achieving the highly ambitious target of totally eliminating chemical weapons. And this is a result not only of cooperation between many countries, but also of cooperation between industry, business, research institutions, and organizations of those countries. And without such cooperation, the implementation of many of the provisions in the convention would not have been possible. This year's prize is therefore being awarded to a form of international cooperation of which we need much more in other areas as well. But it has not all been successes. The OPCW was unable to observe the deadline, which was April 2012, for the destruction of declared chemical weapons. Some 20%, chiefly American and Russian weapons, have not yet been destroyed. It is, of course, not acceptable that two leading powers, themselves so eager to see others destroying their stores as quickly as possible, have not yet themselves managed to do the same. So please speed up the process. And now that Syria has joined the OPCW, only 6 states remain non-members. 2 of them, Israel and Myanmar, have signed but not ratified the convention. Please ratify. Angola, North Korea, Egypt, and South Sudan have neither signed nor ratified. Please do so. Your Majesties, ladies and gentlemen, it marks a big step forward that Syria has joined the OPCW, and that plans are now being drawn up for the destruction of all chemical weapons there. It is, of course, a huge challenge for the OPCW to manage to destroy all these weapons under the conditions of war and chaos prevailing in the country, and in much less time than is normally available. The anonymous inspectors from OPCW do an extremely important and difficult job. That makes the presence of many of you here today so significant. Today's prize is also your prize. The target of removing chemical weapons from the surface of the Earth is highly ambitious, but it is not necessarily the case that it will be achieved once and for all. Developments do not stop. We suspect the emergence of new forms of warfare, new types of chemical weapons, types which the world has not seen up to now, and which are potentially dreadful in their consequences. Discussion of possible new substances that are not currently defined in the Convention will confront the OPCW with new challenges. However, we should never underestimate the policy of small steps. The follow-up of the Chemical Weapons Convention by OPCW has shown how small steps can produce large results. Your Majesties, ladies and gentlemen, the dominant direction of the Norwegian Nobel Committee's work over the years has partly been the struggle for disarmament, but still more the struggle for international cooperation, whether through the League of Nations or United Nations. The OPCW has its feet firmly planted in both traditions, which also figures so prominently in Alfred Nobel's will. The current situation in the Middle East and the Persian Gulf lends an important perspective to the Chemical Weapons Convention and to the existence of OPCW, namely that such a multilateral framework once again became a platform from which to attempt to resolve a current crisis without the use of weapons. We were on the verge of a new military confrontation in the Middle East, which could have unimaginable consequences. That has so far been avoided. The improved climate this creates may pave the way for negotiations for a solution to the whole conflict in Syria. We know from experience that one good step may be followed by others. I hope everybody is with me in a plea to the parties. Lay down the arms, stop the bloodbaths, come to the negotiating table. The fact that the leadership of the Russian Federation saw the Chemical Weapons Convention and the OPCW could be used to shift the conflict over chemical weapons onto a new track, and that President Obama responded favorably, may also have contributed to creating a new climate around Iran's nuclear program. President Rouhani went to the UN General Assembly with a more favorable message than we have heard before. A telephone conversation between the presidents of Iran and the United States took place for the first time for over 30 years. An important, though as not yet preliminary, agreement has been concluded to limit Iran's nuclear program. We know that a political solution in Syria and a peaceful solution to Iran's nuclear weapons program are difficult, but developments are more promising than for a long time. Let one political step follow the other. Give peace a chance also in the Middle East. Now, peace is a difficult issue, as we have seen even in the debate of the Nobel Peace Prize. Many feel that the prize should always go to bold individuals with firm principles. Indeed, we need such models to create hope in a complicated and for many a threatening world. The prize has often gone to such outstanding individuals. Many of them have moved the world in the right direction. But peace is not brought about by individuals and idealists alone. We also need practical politicians capable of moving the world away from confrontation within often narrow limits. We also need institutions, not least the global ones like the United Nations. It is the interplay between all these that can create peace. The Nobel Peace Prize has accordingly honored all these directions, and this must remain the Nobel Committee's platform. Alfred Nobel's will is a visionary document and concrete at the same time. He wrote that the prize should go to whoever had done most for fraternity between nations, the reduction of standing armies, and the holding of peace congresses. The agreement of 2010 between Presidents Obama and Medvedev concerning strategic nuclear arms was important because the alternative was a new nuclear arms race. So it fitted in with a modern understanding of Alfred Nobel's demand for the reduction of standing armies. The Chemical Weapons Convention and the work of the OPCW meet all Alfred Nobel's requirements. They concern disarmament, are a form of modern peace congress, and strengthen fraternity between nations. And what is more important, while negotiations concerning nuclear arms have been based on the exclusive right claimed by the nuclear powers to have nuclear arms, the Chemical Weapons Convention contains no such right. It is a real disarmament agreement. All countries must eliminate their chemical weapons. All nations are treated equally. And this must be the perspective also where nuclear arms are concerned, and was actually decided by the UN Security Council meeting called by President Obama in 2009. Nuclear weapons too must vanish from the face of the earth. Many people ask, ladies and gentlemen, not least in Syria itself, whether it really makes any difference whether one is killed by chemical weapons or by conventional means. For those who are hit, the answer is no, though no one should underestimate the suffering that chemical weapons impose on their victims. On the road to a more peaceful world, however, it is important to combat the most monstrous weapons first, the weapons of mass destruction. We have banned biological weapons. The Norwegian Nobel Committee has awarded many prizes to the struggle against nuclear weapons. Today, the focus is on chemical weapons and on the progress we have made. The honor for that goes to the 1997 Convention and to the OPCW. We praise today's laureate, while our thoughts at the same time go to the many that paid their lives on the battlefield, in their homes, on the squares, in schools and hospitals, wherever mass killing occurred when the inhuman gas arrived. OPCW's work also brings justice to them. Congratulations to OPCW. You really deserve it. Thank you. And now I call upon Director General Ahmed Ursumcu, the representative of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate for 2013, to come forward and receive the diploma and the gold medal.
Erfülle, was die Sehnsucht reinen sich verspricht. Ob vor irgend irgend einem Weltgericht sich dies rätselhafte Sein enthülle. Hoffen soll der Mensch, wir klagen nicht. Die du so gern in heiligen Nächten feierst und sanft und weich den Grab verschleierst, dir eine zarte Seele quält, o Hoffnung, lass durch dich emporgehoben den Dulderahnen, dass dort oben ein Engel seine Tränen zählt. O Hoffnung, lass durch dich emporgehoben den Dulderahnen, dass dort oben ein Engel seine Tränen zählt. Ein Engel seine Tränen zählt. Ein Engel seine Tränen zählt. Stimmen schweigen, Wände ausgestorbenen Zweigen, veröde die Erinnerung singt. Trauert und von der Mitternacht umschauert sich auf versunkenen stürzt. Und blickt auf das Schicksal zu klagen und scheinen über seinen Tagen die letzten Strahlen untergehen. Dann lass ihn den Rand des Erdentraumes, das Leuchten eines Wolkensaumes von einer nahen Sonne sehen, von einer nahen Sonne sehen. Die du so gern in heiligen Nächten feierst und sanft und weich und Graben schleierst, die eine zarte Seele quält. dich emporgehoben, den Dulder hast du oben ein Engel seine Tränen zählt. O Hoffnung, lass durch dich emporgehoben, den Dulderanen, dass dort oben ein Engel seine Tränen zählt, ein Engel seine Tränen zählt, ein Engel seine Tränen zählt. O Hoffnung.
Your Majesties, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I now call upon Director General Özümsü, the representative of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, to give the Nobel Lecture for 2013.
Your Majesties, distinguished members of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is with profound humility that I accept this prize on behalf of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, its member states, their ambassadors and secretariat staff, past and present, some of whom are with us today, including my immediate predecessor, Ambassador Rogelio Firter. This award recognizes our combined efforts which flow from the collective spirit of the OPCW in working towards a common good that serves all humanity. I feel deeply privileged to be able to address you on this occasion. I also take this opportunity to honor the memory of Nelson Mandela. He will remain, for all of us and future generations, a beacon for what can be achieved against overwhelming odds to advance peace, dignity, and reconciliation. The Nobel Committee has a long history of honoring achievement in disarmament. Yet, this is the first time that the Peace Prize has been awarded to an organization that is actively engaged in disarmament as a practical and ongoing reality. For 16 years now, the OPCW has been overseeing the elimination of an entire category of weapons of mass destruction. Our task is to consign chemical weapons to history forever. A task we have been carrying out with quite determination and no small measure of success. Under the terms of the Chemical Weapons Convention, the OPCW has so far verified the destruction of more than 80% of all declared chemical weapons. We have also implemented a wide range of measures to prevent such weapons from re-emerging. And with 190 states now members of this global ban, we are hastening the vision of a world free of chemical weapons to reality. The remarkable success of chemical disarmament has borne out the promise made by Nobel Peace Prize laureate and former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan when he characterized the first meeting of member states back in 1997 with the following words: "It is not merely a great step in the cause of disarmament and non-proliferation. It is not merely a signal of restraint and discipline in war. It is much more. It's a momentous act of peace." Excellencies, Ladies and gentlemen, there can be no doubt about the value of this work, for chemical weapons have been used with brutal regularity over the 20th century and tragically in this century as well. No weapon, of course, has a monopoly on cruelty or lethality, but chemical weapons have, by any measure, an especially nefarious legacy. Almost 100 years since their first large-scale use on the battlefields of Flanders, it is worth reminding ourselves of the reasons why these weapons invoke such horror right up to our own time. Chemical weapons stir the deep-rooted and pathological fear all humans share of being poisoned. They do not discriminate between combatant and civilian, nor between battlefield and village. You cannot see them, you cannot smell them, and they offer no warning for the unsuspecting. But their effects are devastating, burning, blinding, or suffocating their victims. That is rarely instant and never painless. And when they fail to kill, as they often do, these weapons inflict lasting damage on people and their environment, denying them the opportunity to repair and rebuild in the wake of conflict. I need not describe these effects in all their gruesome variations. They would defy any description. It's enough to look at the pictures of victims to understand the agony that they must have gone through, from Ypres in Belgium to Sardash in Iran, from Halabja in Iraq to Ghouta in Syria. And we only need to look at the fate of the survivors of such attacks, people destined to spend the rest of their lives suffering unbearable physical or psychological pain, to understand why such weapons must be banned. Chemical weapons evolved over time with the discovery of new and deadlier agents. But whatever their form, they share one common purpose: to invoke fear and submission through the horrifying nature of their impact. Scores of victims beyond the battlefield have attested to this. In accepting this prize on behalf of the OPCW, I also pay homage to all these victims. The first attempt to ban the use of chemical weapons under international law was the Hague Convention of 1899. The fact that this treaty was not observed during the First World War prompted immediate efforts to negotiate a stronger norm. These efforts resulted in the 1925 Geneva Protocol. While it prohibited the use of chemical weapons, the protocol did not ban their production or possession. History, alas, did not bear out its robustness. Chemical weapons continued to be used across the globe, including against civilian populations. And alarmingly, large and more sophisticated arsenals were developed during the Cold War. It was not until the 1980s that negotiations for a more comprehensive chemical weapons treaty got underway in earnest. Chemical attacks being perpetrated at that time by the former regime in Iraq added to the urgency of this process. Fortunately, it was not only the brutal effects of chemical weapons that focused minds. What drove the negotiators was also the imperative to ensure the effectiveness of the future norm to ban these weapons. States were adamant that chemical weapons had to be made a thing of the past by deeds, not just words. What they strove for was a treaty that all but enforced compliance, coming closer than any predecessor to guaranteeing adherence to its provisions. And after almost 2 decades of difficult negotiations, they succeeded. Their efforts gave birth to the full global ban that came to be known as the Chemical Weapons Convention, and to an entirely independent organization, the OPCW, to oversee its implementation. As difficult as the challenges in bilateral arms control have been, concluding this multilateral treaty was clearly a singular achievement. It also stands as a major triumph in the history of multilateralism. Almost 80 years after the first large-scale use of chemical weapons, the collective determination of states was finally able to shine through in comprehensively banning these weapons. This resolve of the community of nations lays testimony to the very best that can be achieved by multilateralism in the cause of peace and security. As Benjamin Disraeli observed, through perseverance, many people win success out of what seemed destined to be certain failure. I pay tribute here to all those who, through their dedication and resolve, contributed to this hard-won success for chemical disarmament, and I commend governments for their courage and foresight in taking this bold step. It was out of these negotiations that the crucible of the unique success of the Chemical Weapons Convention was forged, a comprehensive international verification mechanism, a mechanism that had no prior model and had to be developed from scratch, a mechanism that obliges every one of the Convention's 190 member states without discrimination to destroy its chemical weapons stocks and production facilities, and to lay bare, through inspection, any industrial facilities that could be used for purposes prohibited by this treaty, a mechanism that brooks no exceptions and can conduct inspections at short notice to investigate alleged use of chemical weapons or suspicions over banned activities. In short, a mechanism that places the onus on states to ensure full transparency vis-à-vis their obligations, with the OPCW acting as arbiter and guardian of the Chemical Weapons Convention. With the entry into force of the Convention in 1997, we have thus been able to cross and link the white space in disarmament between passion and practicality, between sentiment and action, between noble ambition and concrete achievements. And for the first time in the history of multilateral diplomacy, we were able to show that consensus-based decision-making can yield practical, effective, and above all, verifiable results in disarmament. From where we stand now, I commend Member States' commitment to effective implementation of the Convention. The Convention's achievements make the recent chemical attacks in Syria, which shocked us all, even more tragic. For they highlight the manifest security advantages that states adhering to the Convention enjoy. In the 16 years that the Convention has been in force, no member state has experienced an attack with chemical weapons. Thankfully, the international response to those attacks set in motion an extraordinary series of events. These resulted in Syria's accession to the Convention and frontline role for the OPCW, working together with the United Nations to eliminate Syrian chemical weapons. Never in its history has the OPCW overseen the destruction of such a major chemical weapons stockpile in the midst of a civil war and in such compressed timeframes. But as much as this mission is testing our capacities and resources, our progress so far has only strengthened our confidence that we can succeed. I am immensely proud of those staff members from the OPCW as well as the UN who have volunteered to work in Syria in what are extremely challenging circumstances. Their dedication and personal courage do great credit to both organizations. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, international consensus on the elimination of Syria's chemical weapons has as its basis the same consensus that drove the Chemical Weapons Convention to conclusion. The challenge now is to persuade those 6 countries still outside the Convention to join it, without delay or conditions. There has long been no reasonable defense for not doing so, all the more now in the wake of the robust international reaction to recent use of chemical weapons. No national interest can credibly outweigh either the security or economic benefits of adhering to the global ban of chemical weapons. It's my fervent hope that this award will spur on efforts to make the Chemical Weapons Convention a truly universal norm. Universal adherence to the Convention would be the most enduring investment in its integrity and the best guarantee of its reach. We cannot allow the tragedy that befell the people of Ghouta to be repeated. The durability of the Chemical Weapons Convention owes as much to what followed in the implementation of the treaty as to what was negotiated into it. Key in this regard are the OPCW's active partnerships with science. These partnerships have in significant measure defined the success of the Convention because of the dual-use nature of what goes into making chemical weapons. Many of their materials and technologies also have beneficial commercial and industrial applications. Without a common understanding of where the line must be drawn between what helps us and what harms us, there can be no effective verification. It is the OPCW's partnerships with science that have drawn this line in a clear and defensible way. They have done so by devising tools and methods for defining, detecting, and protecting against chemical weapon agents and monitoring new and emerging technologies of potential concern. More than this, they have facilitated the sharing of such information between peers. And crucially, they have opened up a new sort of dialogue that makes the impact of scientific discoveries better understood. We need to deal with the situation in which, as Isaac Asimov put it, science gathers knowledge faster than society gathers wisdom. It is for this reason that the OPCW has worked hard to enhance awareness of the often fine line between beneficial and harmful applications in chemistry through education programs and outreach to academia. Our aim is to contribute to efforts towards fostering a culture of responsible science. This will ensure that current and future generations of scientists understand and respect the impact that their work can have on security. What we are striving to create, together with our partners, is a two-tiered structure for supporting advances in chemistry, one that accommodates a collective early warning system for scientific discoveries that could be misused, and a global repository for knowledge, expertise, and technologies that should benefit all nations. Industry has been no less important partner for the achievement of goals enshrined in the Chemical Weapons Convention. Its concerns were discussed and addressed from the very beginning of the negotiations on the Convention. Specifically, industry had to have complete confidence in arrangements made for commercial protection. Without such arrangements, there could be no productive collaboration and therefore no access to commercial chemical facilities for inspections. Given the degree to which the Convention's verification requirements are entangled with normal commercial and industrial processes, industry's active participation is vital. Some 2,500 inspections later, in more than 80 countries, we have shown that the Convention's arrangements work. Our ambition now is to better integrate industry as a partner, working to ensure continued and effective implementation of the Convention. More broadly, this sort of partnership with the private sector points a way forward for many of the non-traditional multilateral challenges we are facing, from climate change to poverty alleviation. It's a key area of focus for the OPCW's efforts to augment the Convention's profile and adherence to it. When the Chemical Weapons Convention was concluded in 1992, it was rightly heralded as the most tangible disarmament outcome of the immediate post-Cold War period. But over the more than two decades since then, we have little else to show in the area of disarmament for the enormous peace dividend that the end of the Cold War brought us. It's high time to move towards a different, more durable security in keeping with the extraordinary opportunities that globalization has brought. A security that accommodates human development, economic cooperation, and mutual prosperity. Effective implementation of the Chemical Weapons Convention has played a definitive role in empowering a broader community of stakeholders to this end. Their voices are persuasive because they are pragmatic. They issue moral argument in favor of facts, and their modes of presentation only enhance their credibility. These include objective assessments of verification methods, innovative cost-benefit analysis of retaining weapons of mass destruction, and frank reviews of the commercial impact of treaty compliance. Finally, they have been able to give expression to their voices and test their judgments through new habits of dialogue and cooperation between scientists and policymakers, between industry and academia, and between civil society and government officials. It is these sorts of habits that the OPCW is committed to fostering. As a means of preserving the legacy of the 2013 Nobel Peace Prize, I announce here that the prize money awarded by the Nobel Committee will be used to fund annual OPCW awards. These awards will recognize outstanding contributions to advancing the goals of the Convention. I am sure that along with other stakeholders, the civil society will continue to play a significant role in this regard. For its part, the OPCW will do its utmost to remain a highly effective organization, an organization that continues to invest in its most valuable asset, a cadre of highly skilled and dedicated people, an organization that anticipates future challenges, and an organization that adapts its resources and expertise to be able to respond to them. Syria has tested us in this regard. Verifying the declaration of a member state is a routine activity for the OPCW, but there is clearly nothing routine about the circumstances in which we are doing so in that country. We would welcome the opportunity of new member states submitting themselves to the verification regime of the Convention. At the same time, we are looking beyond what we do to how we do it. Our aim is to build on our 16-year record of success by increasing our efficiency and broadening our reach. This not only means staying abreast of scientific and technological advances that may test our understanding of what constitutes a chemical weapon. It also requires us to ensure that we are making the best possible use of advances in communication, especially publicly available tools. Having seen how rapidly information can be conveyed by social media and critically verified through images, we need to consider how we might harness such tools for our monitoring, verification, and investigation activities. This could render particular benefits for our work with member states to prevent non-state actors from gaining access to dual-use materials and know-how. And in our world of globalized trade and supply chains, it could potentially help member states further improve their ability to track exports of dual-use goods and materials, to ensure that these goods go where they are supposed to go and are used for purposes they are intended to be used for. We are also thinking about how we can employ new communication tools to raise awareness of the need to practice responsible science, to instill the highest ethical standards in our future scientists and researchers. Finally, we are expanding and deepening our interaction with other international organizations. The United Nations is central in this regard, whether in partnership on the ground in Syria or in our broader mutually reinforcing efforts to promote disarmament. We are likewise engaging regional organizations to use their forums and networks for raising awareness of the goals of the Chemical Weapons Convention, including in helping to secure universality. Our interaction with other specialized international agencies is useful at identifying areas of overlap that enhance chemical security, ranging from addressing transnational crime and terrorism to building capacity for chemical emergency responses. And we are working with other arms control treaty organizations to exchange best practices in areas ranging from dual-use challenges to verification methods. Institutional cooperation is the bedrock of the broader stakeholder engagement on which the OPCW prides itself. Cooperation which I hope we can underwrite with increased communication and social networking, stimulating fresh ideas and innovative inputs. Your Majesties, distinguished members of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the history of arms control has shown no lack of passion. Yet, when so much is at stake, passion must take care to ground itself in reality if it is to achieve its ambitions. This means being pragmatic, clear-minded, even dispassionate, about acquiring the best possible tools for achieving and consolidating disarmament goals. And it often means governments showing the political courage to take tough decisions for the benefit of the community of nations. The Chemical Weapons Convention has shown that this sort of an approach yields results, for the Convention is more than mere words and promises on a piece of paper. It is a comprehensive regime geared towards ridding the world of chemical weapons and making sure they never again threaten humankind. In this regime, member states provide the will behind the Convention, and it is the OPCW that provides the force for making its goals a reality. Our work, imbued with resolve and certitude, is the international community's guarantee of the Convention's implementation. It shows that from lofty dreams, we can carve out steps leading us from vision to reality. It took almost a century to achieve a total ban on chemical weapons, a century over which thousands fell victim to these heinous weapons, a century at whose end we can now look to a future free of the scourge they represent. No value can be placed on this achievement, and no effort should be spared in sharing the gains it has brought us. Those of us who have worked towards chemical disarmament recognize that with our success also comes an obligation to broaden it. The Chemical Weapons Convention has given us a legacy that no future disarmament effort can afford to ignore, a legacy that has at its core verification, broad stakeholder engagement, consensus born of trust, and above all, a commitment to science that actively serves the cause of peace and security. It is this legacy that we must set as the keystone in an ever-widening arch of disarmament. Only by building such an arch will we be able to bridge our security and our prosperity. Destiny has ruled that we rid the world of chemical weapons, and that we achieve this in our lifetime. This is our place in history, and this is the future we are creating, a future for which our children and grandchildren can be truly thankful. I thank you.
very